Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello, you're watching the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel with me, DJ. And today we have a budget deck. A really great budget deck because it's under $20 at the time of recording. Let's check out Virtuous the Veiled, partnered with Gorm the Great. Let's check out Virtuous first. 2 and a black for a 1/1 legendary Arza Assassin. It can partner with Gorm the Great. That means that both of these can be in your command zone at the same time. Virtuous has Death Touch, and whenever Virtuous the Veiled deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. Half! Alright, and Virtuous is supported by Gorm. Gorm the Great is 3 and a green for a 2/7 giant warrior, and of course it partners with Virtuous. It has Vigilance, and Gorm the Great must be blocked if able, and Gorm must be blocked by 2 or more creatures if able. So this combination makes tons of sense. Virtuous wants to deal combat damage to a player and slash their life in half, and Gorm goes in and absorbs a lot of those creatures that would want to block Virtuous. So the first thing that this deck is going to be is budget. That's going to dictate a lot of our decisions. And as you go through your own collection and decide to maybe build up this deck or build it from scratch, you can start making replacements based on your own individual budget. But it's really nice to have a starting point that's so inexpensive. The next thing this deck needs to be is aggressive. Virtuous the Veiled has to get in and attack. That's what it's all about. Gorm the Great has an advantage when attacking. And so we want to support this with a lot of creatures, a lot of combat-based cards in this deck. And then Virtuous the Veiled comes with Death Touch. And Death Touch works really well with many other cards in this deck. And so I'm going to have a whole section based on Death Touch. And if we're going to be playing creatures like Virtuous that's like a 1/1 Death Touch, we might want to make that creature a little bit bigger. In fact, Gorm the Great can be enhanced as well. Forcing 2 creatures to block it means that if we give Gorm the Great Death Touch or give Gorm the Great +5/+5, then suddenly he becomes a great way to take out your opponent's creatures. And of course, both of these come together with excellent partner synergies. And so we're going to make sure that all of the components of this deck really work together to turn into a really fun, aggressive budget deck. Let's jump right into the first category, which is that Death Touch. Death Touch is a great mechanic when we're talking about creature combat. The first card I want to talk about is Archetype of Finality. It does cost 6 CMC for only a 2/3, but it gives every creature we control Death Touch. Giving Gorm Death Touch is really strong because it can attack in and deal 1 damage to one creature that's forced to block it, and 1 damage to the second creature that's forced to block it. And then we're killing 2 for the price of 1, and our Archetype of Finality is safely back, giving even more of our creatures Death Touch. But I might be getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the fundamentals. Some of the fundamentals are just mana ramp, and there is Death Touch on a mana ramp dude. That's Deathcap Cultivator. A 2-mana 2/1 with Delirium Death Touch, so eventually it'll get Death Touch, but more importantly it adds a black or green to our mana pool and it costs only 9 cents. Channeler Initiate is another, it's a great beater. It turns into a 3/4 for just 2 mana, so it becomes a relevant creature later in the game, but it starts off ramping us. And of course, Honored Hierarch had a lot of hype around it when it first came out. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, is this the new card? No, it wasn't the new card. But it's great for us because in the early game, you can play it and then easily get damage through. And later on in the game, we have a lot of ways to supplement it or just make sure that it's another mana dork. We want to make sure that we develop our mana in the early game. Now that we've covered a few pieces of mana ramp, we're going to want to pay attention to card draw. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, draws cards from our opponent, and look at that Death Touch. Same thing with Harvester of Souls. We're going to have tons of creatures swinging in and dying, and so gaining advantage as they die is going to be really great. And Isreth the Awakener also has Death Touch, and can pull creatures out of the graveyard straight onto the battlefield. More card advantage. Karu Mind Eater doesn't have Death Touch, but it has another really powerful ability, Menace, being able to dodge in and get card advantage from our opponents. It's just really great. And then Oran Viper has old school Death Touch, but whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Let's continue the card advantage with some Monarch mechanic. I love this mechanic. Thorn of the Black Rose, Custody Lich, and Entourage of Trust. All of these are amazing cards. By the way, I love how Custody Lich, which is a very good card, is cheaper than Thorn of the Black Rose, which I need to include because it has Death Touch, right? But Thorn of the Black Rose is actually pretty good in Pauper, and so people have been using it a lot. They realize that the Monarch mechanic is just your own personal Phyrexian arena in many of these decks. And this is the kind of deck that it is like that. If we can get the Monarch mechanic going, we attack so well. We get damage through very easily. And then we have all these Death Touch creatures to block with. Gorm himself has Vigilance and is a 2/7. Yeah, we're just built for this Monarch mechanic. All of these have some sort of card advantage on them, but they also attack and block really well. That's what I want. I want a big creature suite that's great at attacking, that's great at building each other up, but also shores up some of the fundamental things we need. Card draw, ramp, removal. In fact, let's talk about some removal. I want to talk about Tetzimoc, Primal Death, and Hythonia the Cruel. These are both huge 6-drops. They both have Death Touch, I love it, but they could also both be huge board wipes. I love Tetzimoc, and the prices come down to just 35 cents. Yeah, the prices on these have been majestic so far. But Tetzimoc can just in the late game wipe out exactly what you need to get damage through. It can be a selective board wipe. I've also included a little bit of Death Touch utility in this section. Acidic Slime we love because it's an answer to everything, and that Death Touch. And then Dire Fleet Ravager, an amazing mythic for only 12 cents. This 5 CMC 4/4 has Menace and Death Touch. And when it enters the battlefield, each player loses a third of his or her life rounded up. Now this is a symmetrical effect, meaning you lose a third of your life too. But this is exactly what we want in aggressive damage-based decks. We will happily give up part of our own life to lower everyone else's life, because we're getting in with tons of damage. We're finding ways to push damage through. And one of the best ways to do that is Trample. The reason why is because we have a deck full of Death Touch, and Trample synergizes with Death Touch so well. The reason why is in Magic, you have to assign lethal damage to a creature, and then Trample lets you trample over. Death Touch means that 1 point of damage is lethal damage. So if your creatures have Trample and Death Touch, a creature blocking it only absorbs a single point of damage and all the rest of it just tramples over. And if they stack up multiple creatures in front of yours, well, 1 damage to one creature kills it, 1 damage to the next creature kills it, a third trample damage to the third creature kills that, and then the rest of it can just trample through onto your opponent. So really, Trample and Death Touch just work so well together, so we're going to embrace that strategy. Brawn can give our entire team Trample if it ends up in our graveyard and we have a forest. Decimator of Provinces. We can emerge this with some of our creature. Heck, let's emerge it off of a Brawn. Just kidding. But when you cast it, creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Trample until end of turn. Decimator of Provinces also has Trample and Haste. And then Overwhelming Stampede, a 5 CMC sorcery. Creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. That could just be +1/+1, +4/+4, +7/+7 even. Yeah, Overwhelming Stampede can just close out a game. And there are other ways to pump our entire team. Loyal Guardian has been something I've been really impressed with, giving a +1/+1 counter on every turn. And we have 2 commanders that we're going to be playing all the time. Yeah, Loyal Guardian's going to work. Ridgescale Tusker, a one-off +1/+1 to our entire team. And then Song of Freylies, again, it's only a one-off effect of +1/+1, but it gives those creatures Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible. This could be sort of a mini anthem, a mini overrun to try and close out a game really quickly. And in the meantime, it can totally ramp us to many, many other spells. So you can see how a lot of these creatures are attacking, but they have utility built in. We have other creatures that sort of pump everything up, making our utility creatures even more threatening. And then we have big plays like that Decimator of Provinces or Overwhelming Stampede to just close out a game. But we're going to want to make sure to make individual creatures threatening, including our commanders, like Virtuous. We're going to want to get him through to cut our opponent's lives in half. So giving him some equipment, giving him some trample will be very, very good. Forebear's Blade, again, +3/+0, vigilance and trample. Perfect. Loxodon Warhammer, +3/+0, trample and lifelink. Sword of Vengeance, +2/+0, first strike, vigilance, trample, and haste. By the way, first strike and death touch also work really well together. All of these can be equipped to many creatures in this deck, and suddenly they're very threatening. And we know that there's a critical mass of creatures that have death touch. Another card that's amazing is Ronus's Monument. It can act as a mana rock because we have a lot of green creatures in this deck, but also we have just a lot of creatures. Tons of them. So we can just play a couple creatures, a couple mana dorks in the late game, and suddenly we have a really threatening attacker. That's what we want, is to make all of our creatures very threatening. There are a few other pieces of equipment that definitely make them threatening. Scythe Claw, a 5 mana living weapon, and it gives the equipped creature +1/+1. But whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. That's really similar to our commander. Same thing we've got with Quietus Spike. Equipped creature has death touch. I love it. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half his or her life rounded up. Again, another one of these effects. By the way, Quietus Spike, $1.20. So definitely pushing the ends of our budget, but I like leaning into this strategy. I think that it's really fun to have all these combat things that cut your opponent's life in half. And by the way, each one of these are triggers. And so the trigger on that Quietus Spike gives will be different than the trigger that Virtuous the Veiled gives. And so we can cut it in half and cut it in half again, or put them on different creatures to make sure we get damage through. It's perfect. And then Raving Dead also pushes the budget at $1.20, but it's got death touch. And it cuts our opponent's life in half again. So I feel like it just has to fit in this deck. Dealing combat damage, cutting our opponent's lives, I think it's amazing. And then finally we have a little bit of spell support. There are a lot of ways that you can support this deck. I think removal would be really good, and it all depends on your collection. I went pretty budget in this area. I have Status Statue. I love that there's a combat trick that gives death touch, and also just a super duper flexible removal spell. And then also Golgari Charm represents something else. It can destroy target enchantment, give creatures -1/-1, sure, all that stuff. But really it has regenerate each creature you control. It's protection. Heroic Intervention and other similar effects, well, they're a little bit expensive, but Golgari Charm giving everything regenerate is the way to protect your board from board wipes. This deck is susceptible to that. An opponent can just kill a bunch of creatures and it takes a really long time for you to recover. So be aware, try not to commit too much to the board. Just make sure you have a backup plan, more creatures to deploy, ways to draw cards, ways to stay in the game, because I wouldn't want you to play this deck, play your whole board out, you're about to win, you're feeling so good, you're attacking people, you get board wiped and suddenly you're top decking for so many turns, it just isn't fun. But in that mind, I do have a few top end spells that can help close out a game. We're going to be playing Gorm the Great and Virtuous the Veiled over and over again, and we have 2 commanders. So let's embrace that. The new card, Skullstorm. 9 mana. Whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. That could be many, many times. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. Each opponent who can't loses half their life rounded up. It's another half-life spell. I really, really like this. By the way, the things that cut their life in half, they get less good at the lower life they get, because in the beginning, they lose 20 life from 40 to 20. But when they're at 6, they're just losing 3 life, but it doesn't matter, dude. Skullstorm is so cool, and this could just wipe away a bunch of creatures, clearing the room for you to attack, and also cut your opponent's life by crazy amounts. And then finally, Genesis Storm. 4 green for a sorcery. Whenever you cast this spell, copy it for each time you cast your commander from the command zone this game. Love it. Basically, for each copy of this spell, you get to get a permanent from the top of your library and put it straight onto the battlefield. This is a great way to explosively get 3 or 5 different permanents smack onto the battlefield. So that's the deck. It's full of amazing creatures, combat enablers, big spells to close out the game. I think that this plays very, very fun. And I love that it can be purchased for, $20 if you're really looking for some deals. But if you just add it to the cart on TCG Player, like $30, $40, yeah, it's just a really great deal for a very fun deck. And I want to thank TCGplayer.com because they sponsor the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. If you want to check out this deck, find the bare bones of it. There's a link in the description that takes you to all the different prices. You can pick out the cards that are the cheapest, shop around for different ones, try to upgrade in different ways. Take the deck, run with it. Thank you, TCGplayer.com, and thank you as well to the patrons. Thank you so much, patrons. You make all of this happen. I love y'all so much. My Patreon can be found at patreon.com/JumboCommander. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to be putting out a lot more content, so I'll see you all really, really soon. Bye.